So I'll just give it a moment here to kick in. All right, perfect. So I'm also going to, there we go. I'm also going to turn my camera off because I am not the only one working from home in my household, and I want to reduce the likelihood of us experiencing any technical issues or interruptions as much as possible. So you should continue to hear my voice, and I'll turn my camera back on at the end of the presentation. Does anyone have any questions right now? So as I mentioned, please share them in the chat on the right-hand side. If you don't know how to use the chat, definitely unmute your mic and I can help you out with that. I'm going to share a few standardized messages with you, and then we'll dive right into the content. So before we get started, the presentation that you're about to view is the intellectual property of D&D. Any reproduction or retransmission of the slides contained in this presentation is strictly forbidden. And the webinar, as I mentioned, is being recorded and will be available on youtube.com. Though your active participation is definitely encouraged, you can simply choose to follow along without using the chat if you prefer. So for today's content, here's a general overview of our session. We're going to start by identifying a few dietary patterns and what they consist of and how they impact our health. And then we'll talk about why and how our food and those dietary patterns influence our mental health and our well-being. And then we'll identify some of the specific nutrients and constituents of diet that have been shown to positively influence our brain chemistry. And all of this information ties really nicely into nutrition for cardiovascular health. So we'll discuss how certain foods are really beneficial for our heart health and our heart's function. And then I'll provide some really great tips and practices on how to ensure that your eating patterns are optimal for, that healthy heart and healthy mind. If I pause throughout the beginning, it's just because I'm admitting a few participants into the presentation, so I apologize for that in advance. We've just got a few people joining us here, which is really great. So the typical way that North Americans eat is otherwise known as the Western diet. And this has been associated with numerous health risks, which include cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and obesity. And scientists have characterized this diet pattern as one that focuses highly on processed foods, which are unfortunately high in saturated fats, so the unhealthy fat, sodium, and refined sugar. These are the foods that we consider to be tasty but are not healthful. I just see a comment in the chat, inauguration live. Could you just clarify or expand on that a bit, Gary, please? So as I mentioned, this diet is higher in those unhealthier kind of constituents of diet. And as a consequence of that focus on those highly processed foods, we are, the Western diet is lower on whole foods like whole grains, fruit and vegetables. Thus it's lower in those healthful nutrients such as omega-3 fatty acids, dietary fiber, and phytochemicals. So essentially this diet is filled with packaged foods, junk foods, fast foods for the most part, and those contain refined ingredients. And these types of foods, for example, sugary drinks like sodas, refined carbohydrates like white pastas or white bread, and processed meats like deli meats, they can increase oxidative stress and decrease good gut bacteria. And this eating pattern is also associated with depression and even possibly Alzheimer's disease. And it promotes inflammation, which is an important underlying mechanism for the development of other diseases and illnesses like depression and type 2 diabetes, cancer, and heart disease, as I mentioned earlier. So inflammation is one of those indicators, that an inflammatory diet, it likely leads to those illnesses. On the other hand, we have the more traditional diets, for example, the Mediterranean diet and the Japanese diet. So the traditional Mediterranean diet is almost the opposite of the Western diet. It's characterized by a high consumption of vegetables, fruit, legumes, fish, and unprocessed grains. And it has a lower consumption of lean meats and dairy products. They're still there, but it's a lower consumption. And the Mediterranean diet has a moderate amount of fat, but much of that fat comes from healthful fats like unsaturated omega-3 fatty acids. And because of the constituents of the Mediterranean eating pattern, it's high in monounsaturated fatty acids, antioxidants, phytonutrients like carotenoids, vitamins like vitamin C, vitamin E, and other vitamin and minerals, and also dietary fiber, which is really important as well. And we're going to expand on that in a few slides. So I mentioned phytochemicals. Those are natural compounds that are found in plant foods like vegetables, fruit, even whole grains and legumes. And these have anti-inflammatory benefits, meaning that they help reduce inflammation and with it, chronic disease and illness. So whole and minimally processed plant foods also provide prebiotic fiber, which is going to promote intestinal health. And we're going to talk about the significance of that in a few slides as well. So essentially, this type of eating pattern, the more traditional diets, they're full of nutrient-dense whole foods and either very low in or completely without those highly processed foods. So what are the impacts of this style of eating on our mental health and our moods? I know I mentioned that, traditional diets are more anti-inflammatory, whereas the Western diet is more inflammatory, pro-inflammatory, and that can reduce that has an impact on, the likelihood perhaps of Alzheimer's disease even. There's a lot more research on that, and also depression. So let's look at that a little bit further. So there was a recent article published on the Harvard Health Publishing website that indicated that studies have compared those traditional diets like the Mediterranean diet and the Japanese diet to a Western diet. And these studies have shown that the risk of depression is 25 to 35% lower in individuals who eat a traditional diet, which is amazing. So scientists account for this difference. Well, actually, I'll ask you the question. What do you think would account for this difference, given what I've shared with you regarding the constituents of a Western diet and a Mediterranean diet or a Japanese diet? You can feel free to enter it in the chat if you're comfortable. So what would account for this difference in the reductions of depressions between these diets? Saturated fats, absolutely. So saturated fats are commonly found in those highly processed foods, right? And it's not just saturated fats, it's the added sugars, sodiums, unhealthy fats. So you hit it right there. That's great. It leads us right into the answer here. The scientists and the research has shown that vegetables, fruits, unprocessed grains, fish and seafood, they contain they're eating modest amounts of lean meats and dairy. So they're not super high in those meat and dairy products, but they're void of those refined foods and processed foods and sugars, which are kind of staples of the Western dietary pattern. Yes, fast food, exactly. Additionally, they found that many of the unprocessed foods are fermented, and therefore those foods act as natural probiotics, which is really interesting as well. And there's another study that's tested the impacts of dietary patterns on mental health, and it was conducted by the Food and Mood Center, which is at Deakin University in Australia. It's a really cool center. They just study the impacts of of food on your mood, which is really cool. So their trial was called the SMILES trial. That's an acronym because it's a really long title. So basically, the SMILES trial investigated the question, if I improve my diet, will my mood improve? So the participants were individuals from the community who reported experiencing symptoms of depression. And the participants were split into two groups. There was a befriending group, which is also the control group, and the second group was a diet group. So for the control group, participants, they met with a member of the research team and they received social support, and that's it. Whereas the dietary group received the same social support as the control group, but they also received a dietary intervention, which involved following a Mediterranean style diet for 12 weeks. And they also met with a dietitian for, dietary education, support, and nutritional counseling. So the results of this study were published in the international journal BMC Medicine. And they showed that participants in the dietary group had a much greater reduction in their depressive symptoms over that 3-month period compared to those in the control group who only received social support, right? So additionally, at the end of the trial, a third of the people in the dietary support group met criteria for remission of major depression. And that's compared to only 8% of those who were in the control group. So, these results were not explained by changes in physical activity or body weight. They were closely related to the extent of dietary change. So in other words, the people who improved their diet the most, they experienced the greatest benefit to their depression, which is amazing. And this is just one study, but that's very, it was well done. And it's really cool to see, the science behind it. So what does this tell us? First off, simply changing your dietary pattern doesn't translate to a cure for mental illnesses, but what we eat does impact our mood, our energy levels, and even our depressive symptoms. And this makes sense because if we think about the building blocks of what our brains are made of, they're made out of nutrients. And these nutrients are going to affect how we feel, and they're going to affect us. So let's dig a little bit deeper into why and how our food impacts our mood. What's really going on, and what's the connection between food and mood? Why are we here? Why are we so interested in this? So the connection between what we're eating and how we're feeling is called the gut-brain axis. And here when I say gut, I'm referring to your intestinal microbiome, which I'm just going to type in the chat here for those who've never heard of this term before. So your intestinal microbiome, which is made of billions of good bacteria, healthy bacteria that do so many things. So these healthy bacteria that make up your intestinal microbiome, they protect the linings of your intestines. They provide a strong barrier against toxins and bad bacteria. They also limit inflammation, which we talked about earlier as being, unhealthy because it can lead to a lot of chronic diseases and illnesses. The healthy bacteria in your microbiome improve how well you absorb nutrients from your food. And they also activate neural pathways that travel directly between your gut and your brain. This is amazing. This is so cool. So there is anatomical and physiological two-way communication between the gut and the brain via a nerve that's called the vagus nerve. And you can think of the gut-brain axis the same way that this picture depicts it. So our brain and our gut have a direct telephone line to each other, which is so cool. The gut-brain axis offers us a much greater understanding of the connection between diet and disease, including depression and anxiety. So when we consider this amazing connection between the brain and the gut, it's really important to know what serotonin is. So would anyone like to share what serotonin is or what its function is in the body? I invite you to share it in the chat there. Anyone have an idea of what serotonin is, what it does? It doesn't have to be a scientifical or scientifical there, a scientific biochemical answer. Just keep it simple. Helps filter junk thoughts. I like that. That's really great. Feel good enzyme. Yeah, these are really awesome answers. So let's piece them together to make the scientific answer. So when we so serotonin, it's not an enzyme, you're close, it's a neurotransmitter. And this neurotransmitter, it helps us regulate sleep and appetite, mediate our moods, and inhibit pain. So it's often termed as the feel-good neurotransmitter. And as you can see, putting these two answers together, feel-good neurotransmitter and helps filter junk thoughts. It's really great that it's our feel-good neurotransmitter. And what's really incredible is that 90% of your serotonin is located and produced in the gut. 90%. And since your gastrointestinal tract is lined with 100 million nerve cells or neurons, nerve cells are neurons, it makes sense that the inner workings of your digestive system, they don't just help you to digest food, but they also guide your emotions. And what's more is the function of these neurons and the production of neurotransmitters like serotonin is highly influenced by those billions of good bacteria that make up your intestinal microbiome. And the nutrients in the food that you eat are critical for making these neurotransmitters. So if we have low levels of these nutrients in our body, it's going to affect the production of feel-good neurotransmitters like serotonin as well as dopamine. Dopamine is just another feel-good neurotransmitter. And that's going to ultimately contribute to, low energy, brain fog, and a depressed mood even. So just take a moment to reflect on how you feel mentally after you've eaten well for a few days. So maybe that's just having more vegetables, fruit, whole grains, maybe less white pasta or white rice, less fried foods, frozen dinners, whatever, chips, desserts. Those unhealthy foods are considered empty calories and they don't actually energize us. They weigh us down. So that makes sense. And healthful foods that we eat they also contain certain nutrients that are important for maintaining the healthy gut bacteria that create your microbiome. So in a healthy microbiome, bacteria work together to produce substances that are essential and critical to the functioning of not just our brain, but also the immune system and our hormone systems. I just have a question here. Does exercise have an effect on serotonin? That's a great question. And absolutely, exercise is going to help us boost serotonin levels. That is a really short answer for you, but we can expand at the end, definitely, Gary, if that's okay. But short answer is yes, absolutely. Exercise has a positive impact on our serotonin levels. My pleasure. So in essence here, we need to make sure that we're eating, those nutrient-dense whole foods in order to make sure that for the healthy gut bacteria that make our our microbiome, we need to make sure that we're eating those foods so that those bacteria thrive, so that we can have a healthy gut and effectively a healthy mind. So what are some practical tips that we can start implementing every day? Here are some suggestions of dietary choices that we can start making for a healthier gut and improved mood. So I've mentioned this probably 5 times already, but that's because it's true and it's important. Eating whole foods and trying to avoid packaged or processed foods as much as possible because they're high in unwanted food additives and preservatives that can disrupt the healthy bacteria in our gut. So maybe try to replace one packaged or processed food that you eat on a weekly basis with a whole food. So for example, instead of eating sugared cereal, on Monday mornings, have oatmeal with whole oats instead, or maybe instead of granola bars that are store-bought, try making your own trail mix from whole nuts, seeds, and dried fruits. Those are just some ideas. Instead of vegetable or fruit juice, consider increasing your intake of fresh fruits and vegetables. And that way you're getting the benefit of the fiber from the whole fruits and veggies. Frozen fruits without added sugars and additives are a good choice as well. And that's just because those fruit and vegetable juices are higher in sugar and don't have that added benefit of the dietary fiber. And eating enough fiber and including whole grains and legumes in your diet is going to be really beneficial as well. So try eating whole grains at least half as much as you eat refined grain products. So for example, when making rice, you could go half brown rice, half white rice. Going for whole grain, whole wheat pasta instead of white pasta, or whole grain bread instead of white bread. A good technique to transition is to go half and half. Try including probiotic rich foods like plain unsweetened yogurt, without any added sugars into your menu planning. Trying to reduce sugar intake at breakfast. So breakfast is one of those meals that more often than not contains more sugar just because of what's available to us as North Americans. So as I mentioned, sugary cereals or even like white breads or, waffles that are frozen, stuff like that. So try to substitute by, having plain yogurt with some cinnamon and berries, or adding those berries to oatmeal or chia pudding. Trying to add some fermented foods such as kefir, unsweetened kefir, or sauerkraut or kimchi to one meal a week, because it can be helpful to maintain a healthy gut. And that being said, you don't want to just focus on, like prebiotic and probiotic foods. It's going to be that interaction between all of the nutrients. So don't just eat kefir because it's a prebiotic, right? Because it's fermented. But adding that once a week can definitely be beneficial. Try including fish in your meals at least twice per week. That is a recommendation by Canada's Food Guide and Dietitians of Canada, because fatty fish like salmon and mackerel are a strong source of omega-3 fatty acids, which are beneficial for disease prevention and your brain health as well as your heart health. And if you don't like fish, or perhaps you're vegetarian or vegan and you're not eating fish, alternatively, seeking ground flaxseed, because whole flax seeds, our body has a tough time digesting them and breaking them down. So grinding up your flaxseed, sprinkling that onto, yogurt and smoothies, salads, whatever. And I'll give you some more tips on omega-3s in a few slides as well when we're talking about heart health. Try to choose plant-based protein foods more often than animal-based protein foods, because plant-based sources of protein are significantly lower in saturated fats, those unhealthy fats, and they're higher in dietary fiber. And this is so great for your gut. Eat a balance of seafoods and lean poultry and less red meat a week. That's more if you're not vegetarian or vegan. And then you want to add a range of colorful, fresh fruits and vegetables to your diet. So you could start by aiming to eat at least three different colors of fruits and veggies in your daily eating patterns. Health Canada actually recommends that we eat one dark green and one orange fruit or vegetable a day, because they are strong sources of vitamin A, among other phytonutrients, very strong sources of vitamin A. And that's going to provide you with a variety of those phytochemicals. As I mentioned, they contain powerful antioxidants that are going to promote health and prevent disease. So those are a lot of tips, I know, but one by one, focusing on small changes can definitely contribute to a healthy gut And as we know now, a healthy gut is really going to contribute to a healthy mind. So next, I'm going to outline some of the very specific nutrients that impact our brain chemistry. And evidence supports that certain foods can definitely be thought of as medicine, and brain food does exist, and it can improve your mental well-being. That said, it's really important to note that the mental health benefits that come from the food you eat depends on the positive interactions of all the foods that we eat. And it's not just specific nutrients in foods. Okay, so that said, there are some key nutrients that are found in food that can act on our brain chemistry, and I'm actually going to list them for you here. So vitamin C is really great for our brain chemistry, and a strong sources are veggies and fruit. So looking at tomatoes, peppers, broccoli, citrus fruit, and berries. And that list is not exhaustive. Those are just, really strong sources of vitamin C, but you can definitely find them in other foods. Vitamin E is also really great. We can get that from walnuts, almonds, sunflower seeds, hazelnuts, peanuts, wheat germ. Vitamin D, I'm sure many of you might have already guessed the benefits of vitamin D for our brain health. Sources include fortified milk or milk alternative products like soy milk. If and when you're looking at soy milk, definitely try to go for unsweetened, unflavored soy milk. Oh, I'm frozen. Shoot.
We can still hear you, Keira.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're getting a few questions here. Fortin, no here, not here. Okay, so a few people are not hearing me. Can you hear me now? Is this better? Not frozen. Oh, okay, sorry, not frozen here. Okay, thank you. I'm so sorry, Mima. Perhaps her computer or his or her computer is frozen. So I just had one question here. We were talking about, soy milk. So when I was mentioning soy milk, it's a great source of vitamin D in Canada for sure, in North America. Dietitians of Canada recommend, if you're going for an alternative to milk, it's recommended for soy milk because that's the one that's going to contain the most protein, calcium, vitamin D, and it's fortified. More often than not, almond milk, oat milk, those types of other alternatives don't contain as much nutrients as the soy milk would, if that answers your question. And I can also provide you with a really great link to a resource by Dietitians of Canada about selecting milk alternatives. Totally, it's a great question, really commonly asked. And then for vitamin D, I don't have it listed here, but of course, spending time outdoors is going to be an amazing and natural source of vitamin D for your body. You're not actually, absorbing vitamin D from the sun. You're absorbing, the precursor that your body needs to create vitamin D. So definitely recommending 15 minutes per day out in the sun if you can, because it's freezing outside and we're often bundled up, but just having your face in the sun is gonna work wonders, not only for your physical health, but your mental health as well. And there's also beta carotene, which is a form of vitamin A. And that's the one, as I mentioned, that's found in those dark green and orange vegetables. So spinach, kale, carrots, squashes, sweet potato, things like that. A few more here. B vitamins, often found, in whole grains, some meats, poultry, eggs, legumes like lentils, black peas, leafy green vegetables, again, got B vitamins in there, and some fortified cereals as well. Zinc is also really great for brain chemistry, and that's going to be found again in those legumes, seeds, nuts, some dairy products, whole grains. Iron, a big hitter for that one is definitely red meat, but also, again, legumes, leafy greens, quinoa, pumpkin seeds, and then, of course, those omega-3 fatty acids. So strong source. There's actually 3 subtypes, like of omega-3 fatty acids. Fatty fish is going to hit 2 of those, whereas, the flax and chia seeds, walnuts are going to hit 1 of them. So definitely, if you can and are willing to eat fatty fish like salmon and mackerel, that's the one that's recommended by Dietitians of Canada. But if you're vegan or vegetarian, definitely try to include those ground flax seeds and some chia seeds and those other sources for omega-3s too. Olive oil is one of the highest, that's like what they eat as part of the Mediterranean diet, the monounsaturated olive oil, to answer your question there. It's definitely a healthier fat, but it's not listed as like a main source or a high, it's not something that contains mostly omega-3s, if that makes sense. But it is a it's an unsaturated fatty fat. So from that, it does have some omega-3s for sure. And you know what? I can actually provide you with a really cool chart that gives you a breakdown of the constituents of popular cooking oils. If you remind me at the end, Gary, that would be really helpful. And it shows you kind of the breakdown of how much saturated and unsaturated fats, and from that, monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats are found in certain oils. Great question though too. So I definitely listed off a bunch of nutrients and their sources, and they're definitely proven to be great for our brain chemistry and mood. But I just want to reemphasize the point that it's really critical to take a balanced approach to our dietary patterns, and micromanaging and tracking and focusing on each vitamin and mineral would be pretty frustrating and not very sustainable. So the best approach is to ensure that you include a variety of fruits and vegetables and unprocessed whole grains and legumes in your daily eating pattern, because as you could see, a lot of these were sources for multiple nutrients. For example, like legumes, we've got zinc, B vitamins, iron, and other vitamins in there as well. So that's going to be really helpful. The mental health benefits that come from the foods that we're eating are definitely contingent upon the positive interactions between all the foods we eat. So we want to make sure that we're getting a variety. Great questions. All right. So there's a lot of different steps that we can take towards achieving and maintaining a healthy eating pattern. But a great place to start is just to eat less highly processed foods. And that's one of the best things you can do to achieve a healthier diet. And that's because the nutrients are often removed from processed foods while salt and sugar are added in. So that just goes back to the point that I mentioned about those highly processed foods often being empty calories, right? So they're actually full of calories. They're high in calories, but low in nutrients that our bodies need and could use, right? So eating that healthy, balanced diet is one of the most important things you can do to protect your health. And it's not just your gut health and mental health, but your cardiovascular health as well. So up to 80% of premature heart disease and stroke can be prevented through life choices and habits, lifestyle choices, and habits, which would be, a healthy diet and being physically active. So a healthy diet, it's going to help to lower your risk of heart disease and stroke by improving cholesterol levels, right? We can reduce our cholesterol levels. It can reduce our blood pressure, okay? Helps manage and regulate a healthy body weight for your body, and controlling blood sugar. And these are really significant and powerful benefits, because 8 in 10 cases of premature heart disease and stroke are preventable through these healthy lifestyle behaviors, and prevention is key. Okay, and many risk factors for heart disease and stroke are within our power to control, and nutrition is certainly one of them. So it's going to be really helpful if we focus on that. And here we're going to talk about some tips and advice that can be implemented right away for that optimal heart health and function. So one way to start improving your heart health immediately is to eat more vegetables and fruit. I mentioned, decreasing highly processed food intake, and that could mean replacing those processed foods with more fruits and vegetables. because along with them tasting really great, and there's a huge, array of fruits and vegetables to choose from, they offer so many heart healthy nutrients. So Canada's Food Guide recommends including, vegetables and fruit in all of your meals and snacks. So try to have a fruit or a vegetable with every meal or snack. So try to fill half of your plate at meals with vegetables and maybe some fruit, and that's going to help reduce your risk of heart disease and stroke right away. So a lot of vegetables and fruit are particularly rich in vitamin C and in beta carotene, which I mentioned is a form of vitamin A. And those two vitamins work as antioxidants in your body, and they help to slow down and prevent atherosclerosis, which is amazing. They do this by reducing the buildup of plaque from cholesterol and other substances in your arteries. So atherosclerosis is basically plaque buildup in the arteries that can lead to a blockage over time. Some of the vitamin C dynamos, I think I mentioned them, but I'll just repeat, reinforce it. Broccoli, red peppers, strawberries, kiwi, cantaloupe, and oranges. And it's interesting on this note, when we're talking about vitamin C sources, we often think of oranges right away. Well, I do anyways, but red peppers and strawberries are actually higher in vitamin C. So it's just to think about things to think about to broaden, what we're looking for. Okay, and since beta carotene gives food a distinctive orange, dark orange, red, or dark green color, you can definitely spot them at the grocery store. As I mentioned, carrots, tomatoes, squash, things like that. The other bonus here is that almost all fruits and veggies are low in calories as well as fat and sodium. So in fact, research shows that a high consumption of veggies and fruit is associated, of course, with maintaining a healthy weight. And eating veggies and fruit provides a really strong source of fiber. So whenever possible, try to eat the peels too. It's going to make a big difference to your total daily fiber intake. So for example, a raw unpeeled apple has almost 10 times more fiber than a cup of apple juice. And that's an unpeeled apple. So think about with a peeled apple, what that could do. Frozen and canned vegetables and fruit have about the same nutritional value as fresh, which is really great for us as Canadians because we have seasons and, our fruits and veggies, it's kind of gets more expensive in the winter, right? So don't be shy to go for those frozen alternatives that have no additives in them, and look for products with no added sugar or syrup if they're canned. So canned fruit that's packed in water is your best choice. And the best methods of cooking, fresh or even frozen produce is to steam, roast, or to grill the veggies because that's going to preserve as many nutrients as possible. And again, if you're going for those canned veggies, definitely just give them a quick rinse under water to remove any added salt. A key element of a heart healthy diet is going to include foods that are high in fiber. So good sources of fiber can be found mainly in two food groups, the grain products, which include, of course, whole grains like wild and brown rice, oatmeal, and then vegetables and fruit. Protein foods like beans and lentils also have a high source of fiber. And then what's really interesting is that fiber is a carbohydrate that's found in plants. But unlike other carbs, fiber passes through the body undigested. So that means that fiber adds 0 calories, which is a huge bonus if you're trying to manage your weight. And studies show that women who consumed more fiber were half as likely to be obese as those who consumed less fiber, which is super interesting. And obesity is definitely a risk factor for heart disease and stroke. So there are two types of fiber. We've got soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. Now, the soluble fiber is a soft fiber that can help lower blood cholesterol and control our blood sugar levels, whereas the insoluble fiber is bulky. It's also called like the roughage of the food, and it helps you to feel fuller, and it's going to promote that bowel regularity. So keeps you regular. That's where the expression comes from. So with this information, we can definitely say that fiber is a vital part of a healthy diet, not only for our heart, but our minds as well. And the issue is that most of us are getting less than half of the recommended amount. So it's important to know how much we need. The recommendations for females is to have 25 grams of dietary fiber a day, and then for males, it's 38 grams per day. And that's the differences are just due to physiological differences between the male and female bodies. That's really it. So our final points are regarding protein. Whenever we think of protein, we often think right away of like building muscle, right? Well, I do. And that's a lot of the time because of the way it's marketed. But protein is also really vital for our brain and our heart health. So that's because protein provides the amino acids that make up our neurotransmitters. Remember, serotonin being one of those neurotransmitters, and they carry signals from our brain cell to brain cell, from neuron to neuron. And if you don't get enough protein in your diet, it's going to affect your memory and your mental agility. It can decrease your mental agility and your memory. So when we're choosing protein foods, we want to try to choose plant-based more often. And does anyone recall why this recommendation is in place? I mentioned it earlier, why it's recommended that we choose plant-based protein sources more often. Can anyone recall, or does anyone just know off the top of their head? Maya, just kidding. I said Maya because she's also a health promotion specialist. But anyone, feel free to share in the chat. Do you guys remember? Yes, less saturated fats. Absolutely. Yes, it's going to help reduce cholesterol because they're high in fiber. So those were the answers I was looking for. Plant-based proteins are going to provide more fiber and less saturated fats than any other type of protein foods. That's amazing. Why wouldn't we do that? Of course, I know the answer a lot of the time. It comes from, it's not ingrained in us, right? And we aren't aware of certain options that we might have. But if we just take some time to explore, recipes and different types of plant-based proteins, it's going to have that added benefit. And I'm not saying like go vegetarian, go vegan. I'm saying, I'm just endorsing, you could say, the recommendation of choosing those plant-based sources more often because of the huge benefits. So you could also just opt for, poultry, fish, again, beans, rather than high fat meats. That's going to help prevent heart disease. And we want to try to keep our portion sizes of animal sources of protein, like poultry, fish, and beef, to about 75 grams, which is the size of the palm of your hand. And oftentimes our meals are comprised of too much protein and not enough vegetables. So it's really helpful just to be aware of what types of adjustments we can make to our own plates. And, perhaps if you notice that your portion of meat is way bigger than the size of the palm of your hand, simply trim it down and add some more vegetables or whole grains to replace it. I'm not saying to deprive yourselves, just being mindful of those things. So that's really, those were the recommendations there for heart healthy tips. And putting it all together, we have some practices that you can start to implement right away that are going to contribute to both your heart and your brain health. And we talked about quite a few dietary elements and modifications that can be made. And the goal is not to overwhelm, you guys or ourselves, but to start with small steps toward our goal of optimal health. And that means setting specific, attainable, realistic goals that we can be aware of over time. So we can start by thinking about our plate. I know that I've said this multiple times, but the key to eating healthy includes eating more whole foods that are nutrient dense and cutting back on those ultra processed options. And that's going to mean to choose veggies, fruit, whole grains, and protein sources like fish, poultry, beans, and nuts more often than like pre-made burgers, pizza, pop, chips. So when you plan meals, imagine your plate divided into those 3 sections, a quarter protein food, a quarter whole grain, and half veggies with some fruit. So to set it into action, just look at your plate to see if there are any changes that could be made. So maybe you need more vegetables or protein, or you could opt for, whole grains instead of refined grains. Just pick one small change and work on it. Okay. And after that change has become a habit, pick a new small change to work on. Our next practice is about cooking at home, which definitely gives you more control over what you eat. So compared to restaurant food, homemade meals tend to be way lower in salt, sugar, fat, and higher in vegetables. So, ordering takeout for special occasions is definitely going to help out local restaurants, supporting local businesses, small businesses, but it's still important to find a balance. So it's a really great idea to just assess our weekly meal habits and see how often we're ordering takeout food. And to set it into action, try adding one additional home cooked meal to your weekly rotation. Try something new and nutritious from a good reputable source like Heart and Stroke Foundation or unlockfood.ca. And I'm going to share those resources with you, but they have really great, easy recipes that are quick to make. Next, try to make an effort to cut back on added sugar. And this can be very challenging, especially in North America, right? A lot of our foods have a ton of added sugar. And the reason it's important is because a high intake of added sugars is linked to, increased risk of those chronic diseases like heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and cancer. So note that added sugars include any sweetener. It's not just sugar, it's also like honey and syrup that's added to food and drinks. So Heart and Stroke recommends that you consume no more than 10% of our total calories per day from added sugars, and ideally less than 5%. So that basically means that, for an average person who's eating 2,000 calories a day, roughly 10% of that diet is about 48 grams of added sugar. So that's about 10 or 12 teaspoons of sugar. So to put that into perspective, 1 can of soda, that's 355 milliliters, has 10 teaspoons of added sugar. So if someone drank that 1 can of soda, that would already put them at the top end of the recommendation for the whole day. That's just to put things into perspective. So we can follow this recommendation by just minimizing our intake of candy, chocolate, baked goods, and soda. So setting it into action, try replacing 1 weekly sweet beverage with water. And when that becomes the norm, swap an additional drink for water, because water, it's an essential nutrient that our body needs for almost every function, and it's 0 calories. So dark chocolate, right? So anything in moderation, right? These are like, I think I mentioned it a few slides ago. Actually, I didn't. I might have, but dark chocolate is a source of zinc and also iron. So, I mean, like, as long as you're not just eating dark chocolate every day, it's fine. We're more concerned about the added sugar content. So just making sure, it's recommended that the treats that we have every day is from the other food groups is 150 calories or less per day. So whatever those calories are from is totally up to you, but I'm going to say dark chocolate is a source of a few of the nutrients that were mentioned earlier for brain chemistry, good brain chemistry. And if it's in moderation, go for it if you're having that. But just be mindful of the added sugar in the chocolate you're eating, for sure. So replacing, 1 sweet beverage a week, and that's not just soda, but if we're enjoying, like a mocha caramel latte from like takeout, Starbucks, I don't know, that could be a sugary drink as well. Just being mindful of that. Where was I here? Right. So another great practice is to, to build on reducing our added sugar. Try to replace one weekly sweet treat, like a baked good, ice cream, chocolate, or pudding, with a fruit or a smoothie that you make, or even just plain yogurt with frozen fruit or nuts and seeds with it. Maybe if you're more of a savory person, consider replacing one salty snack that you have each week, like chips or cheesies or fries or something with, I know this does not sound as appealing, but yes, crunchy vegetables or air popped popcorn. This is more geared towards reducing, added sodium and saturated fats than added sugars, but it's still really beneficial. And it's not to deprive yourselves, it's just to start thinking about those swaps that we can make. And again, moderation and balance is key, right? Finding whole foods that you actually enjoy, that you actually like. You need to eat the foods that you enjoy, right? Make those healthy foods that you like accessible. You're so much more likely to eat healthy foods that you like the textures and the taste of. Of course you are. So if you know you're going to enjoy a crunchy snack, wash and cut up carrots, celery, peppers, cucumbers, cherry tomatoes, snap peas, whatever. Store them in containers in the fridge so that they're ready to go. Maybe have some bananas or wash some pears, apples, have some oranges ready in bowls that are in those high traffic areas of your house, like your kitchen counter or your dining room table. If the foods are ready and available, we're so much more likely to choose them out of convenience. So make those healthful whole foods convenient for yourself. Wine. Good one, Gary. Oh, sorry, everyone, I have a dog. Another great trick is to cook extra at meals so that you can enjoy leftovers with the hassle, without the hassle, sorry, of preparing a lunch. Yeah, my dog definitely agrees. And then finally, this point's really important. Practice self-compassion. So if you set a nutrition goal and you don't achieve it or you stray, just recognize what triggered you to make alternative choices and make a plan to address those barriers if they come up again in the future. We're constantly bombarded with ads and media about food and food choices, and it's super overwhelming. So if you end up indulging in some junk food, that's okay, as long as it's a treat, and not a daily occurrence. Just remind yourself of why you're making these goals in the first place and why you attended this webinar. It's for your own health and your own well-being, and we deserve to feel our best physically and mentally, and that means making smart choices about our nutrition, about our food. So I really hope that this presentation gave you even more reasons to follow a healthy eating pattern, and that you learned some interesting facts to digest over the next few days. Here are some really great resources that you can use. I'm actually going to put them in the chat so that you can copy and paste them if you so wish. The Unlock Food and Heart and Stroke websites are filled with a lot of heart and gut healthy recipes that are really yummy, and they're super simple to prepare. And I also would love if if you could make some time to share your feedback on the webinar, just to help improve future sessions. So I have a little survey link here. If you are able to, it'll probably take you 3 to 5 minutes to complete it. It's a Survey Monkey, and it would be really helpful for us as a team if you could take some time to complete the survey. Give us your feedback. We welcome it. We need it. And I invite you to follow us on social media. Contact us with any questions you might have. My contact information is here, so you can email me directly as well with any questions or comments. I welcome them. Again, thank you so much for attending, and I'm going to hang back here. For any additional questions or comments that anyone might have, feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself and ask away. But otherwise, thank you so much for attending. I really hope you enjoyed it. And I know there were a few questions about Yes, the recording. So there was one question about fats and the constituents. Yes, the oil. So I'm going to get that right now. And then can we get a copy of the recording? The recording will be available on youtube.com. So I will send the link to you with the email that I send. I'm going to send an email to everyone who attended with a really great handout on the important points from today's session. And I'll also include the YouTube link for you. Thank you. I'm so happy you enjoyed it. I'm just going to get that oil resource right now. I'm so happy that you guys found this helpful. That's awesome. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm just going to get that. So here is the link for the oil chart that shows you a breakdown of the compositions of different cooking oils that we use. Thank you, Maya, so much. Bye, Gary. Thanks for attending so much. And thanks for your questions.